Assalamu alaikum. Today I will be teaching you about anatomy and physiology of human skin. And first of all, welcome to the final year. Okay, I hope you know something about anatomy and physiology of the human skin. It will be just a repetition of everything you know. I hope so. Now, what is human skin? Skin is the largest organ in the body, and it consists of stratified cellular epidermis, underlying dermis of connective tissue, and beneath the dermis there is a layer of subcutaneous fat which is separated from the rest of the body by a vestigial layer of striated muscle. Now, this is a picture showing a human skin histopathology. That is, in topmost is the epidermis, then there is the dermoepidermal junction, then there is dermis, and last of all is the hypodermis. Now, basically epidermis is mainly composed of keratinocytes, which are typically 0.05 to 0.1 millimeter in thickness. It is formed by division of cells in the basal layer, which give rise to the spinous layer. From the spinous layer, the cells move outwards, progressively differentiate into granular layer and the stratum corneum. Cellular progression from the basal layer to the skin surface, it almost takes about 30 days, and it is accelerated in certain diseases like psoriasis. Now, regarding the layers of epidermis morphologically, stratum basale or stratum germinativum, that is from down upwards. Stratum spinosum, granulosum, corneum, and Malpighian layer includes both the basal and the spinous layer. Now, this picture again shows the layers of epidermis. Sorry, it's not that much clear, but the topmost layer is the stratum corneum, then stratum lucidum, which is only present on the palms and soles, then stratum granulosum, then stratum spinosum, stratum basale, and beneath that is the dermis. Now, regarding the cells which are present in the epidermis, these are most important are the keratinocytes, melanocytes, then Langerhans cells and Merkel cells. Regarding the keratinocytes, these are the predominant cell type in epidermis. Almost 90% of the cells are present in the outermost layer of skin. Function is that formation of barrier against environmental damage such as pathogens, heat, ultraviolet radiation and water loss. Regarding melanocytes, they are dendritic cells found in the deepest layer of epidermis, and obviously their function is to produce melanin, which determines our skin color, and they transfer melanin to the surrounding keratinocytes by the means of their cytoplasmic processes. They compose 5% of the cells of the epidermis, and each melanocyte supplies melanin to almost 35 of the keratinocytes. Regarding the Langerhans cells, these are also known as antigen presenting cells. They are called Langerhans because they are first described by Langerhans. They are again dendritic cells of a form similar to melanocytes, but they are free from pigment and dopa negative. With macrophages and dermal dendrocytes, they represent the skin's mononuclear phagocyte system, capable of phagocytosis, antigen processing, antigen presentation, and interaction with lymphocytes. They release cytokines such as interleukin-1 to promote lymphocyte chemotaxis and activation. They have characteristic granules which are rod or racket shaped, which are called Berbick granules. They represent sites where the protein Langerhans accumulates. Regarding the Merkel cells, they are clear cells which are present in stratum basale of the epidermis. They are 6 to 10% in epidermis, associated with sensory nerve endings, so they have useful for sense of light touch. Now, these are cells of the epidermis. The smallest one is the keratinocytes. Then there is dendritic cells, that is the melanocytes. Then again antigen presenting cells, as you can see in between in the center, the bluish Berbick granules. And then these are the Merkel cells, which are sensory nerve endings. Now, stratum basale basically is a continuous layer only one cell thick, and it is 2 to 3 cells thick in glabrous hyperproliferative epidermis. Basal cells are basically small cuboidal, large dark staining nuclei, dense cytoplasm, many ribosomes and dense steinofilament are present. Stratum spinosum and granulosum, these are basically epibasal cells. They enlarge to produce stratum spinosum or the prickle cell layer, succeeded by stratum granulosum or granular layer. Contains the intracellular granules of keratohyalin. At high magnification, dense mass of keratohyalin granules, a particular substructure 2 nanometer in length. Ordland bodies, these are the important component. Cytoplasm of cells of the upper spinous layer and granular cell layer. They contain smaller lamellated granules, 100 to 300 nanometer, membrane coating granules or Ordland bodies. They discharge lipid components into the intercellular space, so they have got an important role in barrier function and as well as in intercellular cohesion of the stratum corneum. Now, basically, stratum corneum is the outermost layer of epidermis composed of corneocytes which have lost their nuclei and cytoplasmic organelles. Basically, these are dead. The cells are flattened and they contain keratin filaments, which are disulfide cross-linked microfibers under influence of filaggrin, protein component of the keratohyaline granule, which are responsible for keratin filament aggregation. Corneocytes, these are insoluble cornified envelope within the plasma membrane, cross-linking of the soluble protein precursor involucrin, action of a specific epidermal transglutaminase also synthesized in the high stratum spinosum. Now, stratum lucidum, as I told you, is present in the palmoplantar skin. It is electrolucent between the granulosum and corneum. Cells, they are still nucleated, so it is also known as transitional cells. These are the histological picture of skin. Stratum corneum is the topmost, then stratum granulosum. Stratum lucidum is present before stratum granulosum. It is very thin layered. Then after granulosum is stratum spinosum, and then there is stratum basale, and beneath that is the dermis, which contains only lymphocytes. Some inflammatory cells are present like lymphocytes in the dermis normally. Regarding the cell division, epidermis is maintained by the cell division in the stratum basale. Cells reach the stratum corneum, they lose their nucleus, fusing to form squamous sheets. Squamous sheets shed from the surface. Differentiated keratinocytes secrete keratin proteins and formation of the extracellular matrix. In normal skin, the rate of keratinocyte production equals the rate of loss. So that is why a balance is maintained. If it is not, then obviously there will appear and a pathology will appear there. Now, the dermal epidermal basement membrane zone, it is defined as the interface between lower part of epidermis and top layer of dermis. Consists of a number of extracellular matrix macromolecules. Many of these components are glycoproteins, and this basement membrane zone can be recognized histologically by the use of PAS stain. This is the dermoepidermal junction. Topmost are the squamous sheets of the stratum corneum. Then there is granular cell layer, then prickle cell layer, which also contains the Langerhans cells, and last of all is the basal cell layer, which contains melanocytes, Merkel cell. Now this is the dermoepidermal junction. As you can see, the keratinocyte is just touching the zone which is known as the dermoepidermal junction. And there are certain proteins present in it, like laminin 5, integrin, fibronectin, etc. Lamina lucida, basically the basement membrane zone is divided into these two, lamina lucida and lamina densa. Sorry for the spelling mistake of lucida, it is written lucida. It is the upper layer, less electron dense region, directly above the plasma membranes of the basal keratinocytes. Then lamina densa, it is below the lamina lucida and electron dense region, which at the lower part interacts with mesenchymal matrix of upper dermis. Besides adhesion, what are its functions? Cell migration, and over 30 different macromolecules are found in it. Now regarding the dermis, what it is basically, it is a supporting matrix or ground substance. Polysaccharides and proteins are linked to produce macromolecules, a remarkable capacity for retaining water. Upper part is the papillary dermis and lower part is the reticular dermis. Now what are the components? The collagen fiber, which is the most important, major extracellular matrix protein, 80 to 85% dry weight of the dermis. 29 different collagens, most important of them are 1 and 3 in the basement membrane zone, type 4 around the dermal blood vessels, nerves and skin appendages. Basically, what are the functions or characteristics of collagen fibers? These are tough and provide skin with tensile strength. Elastic fibers, two components, elastin and elastin associated microfibrils. They contain several proteins like fibrillin, surround elastin and extend throughout the dermis in a web-like configuration to the basement membrane zone. Some other non-collagenous proteins like fibronectins, fibrillins and integrins are also present. Extracellular matrix components, they facilitate cell adhesion and cell motility. Between the dermal collagen and the elastic tissue, ground substance is made up of glycosaminoglycan or proteoglycan macromolecules. Vital role by maintaining hydration. About 60% of the total weight of the dermis is water. Now, this is a picture showing the components of dermis: elastic fibers, reticular fibers, macrophage, nerve fibers, lymphocytes, collagen fibers, ground substance. Now, what is the pilosebaceous unit? These are epidermal downgrowths, mesenchymal cell condensations, 10th to 14th gestational age. Basically, there are 4 classes: terminal, apoliposebaceous, vellus, and sebaceous. Regarding the hair follicle, the pilosebaceous follicles and sweat glands are present in the human skin. Basically, pockets of epithelium are the hair follicles. The continuous superficial epidermis envelopes small pepple of the dermis up to the base. Bundle of smooth muscle, erector pili, is also present. Sites, they are axilla, follicles associated with apocrine glands, and they are acrine sweat glands derived from the epidermis opening at the skin surface. This picture is showing parts of hair. The topmost is the infundibulum, then isthmus, then suprabulbar, and the bulb, where the hair are manufactured or synthesized. This is again a picture of pilosebaceous unit, hair shaft, sebaceous gland, erector pili muscle. So the hair follicle goes to the hypodermis in depth. Cross section of a hair. The outermost is the cuticle, then there is cortex, and the centermost part is the medulla. Hair cycle, basically it is the hair growth cycle. First cycle, that is in which the cell growth occurs, hair growth occurs, is the anagen. Catagen is the resting phase, and telogen is the losing phase or the falling phase. Regarding the nail apparatus, main purpose of the nail apparatus is to provide protection to the digit tips, enhance the sensory discrimination, help increase dexterity, facilitate scratching or grooming, function as a cosmetic accessory. Fingernail development starts by the primitive epidermis, 8 to 9 weeks of gestation. Nail unit contains nail plate and 4 epithelial structures: proximal nail fold, matrix, nail bed, and hyponychium. This picture shows parts of nails. This is lateral nail fold, proximal nail fold, this is the cuticle and lunula, and distal edge of the nail plate is called the hyponychium. This is the finger section. Hyponychium is the distal end of the nail. Then there is the nail body, lunula, nail root. Blood supply. Regarding skin, the dermis has a very rich blood supply. No vessels pass through the dermal epidermal junction. There is superficial and deep vascular plexus. Nerve supply, motor innervation is there, cholinergic component, adrenergic component, sensory nerve endings. They have several kinds, free, terminate in hair follicles and in their expanded tips. Now regarding the functions of skin, first of all is the barrier function, then temperature regulation, mechanical function, immunological function, metabolic function, sensory and autonomic function, and socio-sexual communication. These are the important functions of skin. Barrier function is by the help of cornified cell envelope and stratum corneum, which restricts the water loss from the skin, keratinocytes, which contains endogenous antibiotics like defensins and cathalicitins, innate immune defense mechanism against by certain microorganisms, and melanin in the basal keratinocytes. They play a role in protection against DNA damage caused by ultraviolet radiation. Now, another important function is temperature regulation by the vasodilatation or vasoconstriction of blood vessels and as well as heat loss. Acrine sweat glands, secretions in the form of apocrine sweat glands and body odor, pheromones. Then skin lubrication and waterproofing is done by sebum secreted from the sebaceous glands. Mechanical function, subcutaneous fat provides a cushioning effect against trauma, provides insulation and calorie reserve. Fat has also got endocrine function, hormone like leptin acts on the hypothalamus, regulate hunger and energy metabolism. Functions of fat cells are in tissue remodeling and phagocytosis. Immunological function, epidermis contains Langerhans cells. The prime function is survey epidermal environment, initiate immune response against microbial threats, immune tolerance in the skin. Vitamin D metabolism is the most important metabolic function of the skin. Autonomic function, important role in maintaining cutaneous homeostasis by regulating the vasomotor functions, pilomotor activity, and acrine sweat gland secretion. Sensory function is played by the help of mechanoreceptors, thermal receptors, and pain nociceptors. Mechanoreceptors are present in the hairy skin, on the glabrous skin, and two main types of superficial mechanoreceptors. These are Meissner's and Merkel's receptors. You must be knowing about them much better as compared to me. Subcutaneous tissue and deeper dermis beneath hairy and glabrous skin, two types of mechanoreceptors, that is Pacinian and Rufinase. And also important function is socio-sexual communication. What plays a role in it? Obviously skin plays a very important role in it regarding the nails, hair, appearance of human skin and its associated structure. It plays an important part on the impact on the interpersonal relationships and personal well-being. Thank you. So now I'll be uploading a video. So it will help you in understanding the anatomy.
It's Professor Dave. Let's look at the integumentary system.
He knows a lot about the science stuff. Professor Dave explains.
With some basics covered regarding two of the types of tissue in the human body, we are ready to start looking at some of the different systems found in the body, and we are going to start with the outermost system, which is called the integumentary system. This is made up of the skin that covers and protects all your other body parts, as well as its derivatives, like certain glands, as well as hair and nails. Let's look at the structure and function of these components now. The skin is a remarkable organ, acting as the first line of defense from the elements that surround us. It keeps bacteria out and water and heat in. So let's check out the structure of skin. Our skin is made of two regions, a thin outer layer, which is the epidermis, and a thicker inner layer called the dermis. The dermis, which is a tough layer of fibrous connective tissue, is vascularized, getting its nutrients from the bloodstream. The epidermis, which is made of epithelial tissue, is avascular, so it gets nutrients by diffusion through the tissue fluid from the dermis. In addition, below the dermis is the subcutaneous layer, also called the hypodermis. This is made predominantly of adipose tissue, and it anchors the skin to other structures below. Now let's zoom in on the epidermis, the thin outer layer of the skin. This is made of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, made of 4 different cell types in 5 layers. The deepest layer, the one attached to the dermis, is called the Stratum Basale, meaning basal layer. This is made of a single row of cells, most of which are called keratinocytes. These are rapidly dividing all the time, pushing new cells up into the layers above to help regenerate dead skin and producing lots of keratin as they do so. This is necessary because millions of dead keratinocytes rub off your skin every day due to friction, and even more from your hands and feet. So these constantly dividing cells in the stratum basale ensure that a new epidermis forms every few weeks so that we always have our skin intact. This layer also contains melanocytes, which produce melanin, and tactile cells, which act as the sensory receptor for touch. Above this is the Stratum Spinosum, meaning prickly layer. This section is several layers of cells thick and is full of cells with a web-like system of intermediate filaments attached to desmosomes. They look kind of spiky, so they are sometimes called prickly cells. Here we can also find dendritic cells, which ingest foreign substances and activate the immune system, which we will talk about later. Next is the Stratum Granulosum, or granular layer. This is 4 to 6 cell layers thick, and in this section, keratinization begins as cells continue to move their way upwards from the basal layer. This is when the cells get far enough from the dermal capillaries below to receive sufficient nutrients, so the cells fill up with keratin as they die, and they flatten while the organelles disintegrate. This makes the cell tougher and scalier, which allows for the outer layers to better protect the body. Above this is the Stratum Lucidum, or the clear layer. This is 2 or 3 cell layers thick, made of dead keratinocytes that have become flat and clear. This is where they begin to aggregate into arrays called tonofilaments. And lastly, there is the stratum corneum, or horny layer. This outermost section is 20 to 30 cell layers thick, and all of these cells are anucleated, meaning the nucleus has disintegrated. So it's incredible to think that all the cells covering the outside of your body are actually dead, but they are dead in a specialized way, with thick plasma membranes surrounding lots of keratin. These dead cells protect all the living ones inside from all the outside dangers. With the epidermis covered, let's go a little deeper and talk about the dermis. This is made of strong and flexible connective tissue and is full of nerves and blood vessels. This is also where hair follicles begin. The dermis has 2 sections, the papillary layer and the reticular layer. Descending from the epidermis, we enter the papillary layer, which is very thin, made of areolar connective tissue and a loose network of collagen and elastic fibers. This leaves room for defensive cells to patrol the area for bacteria that may have made it through the skin. The word papillary refers to the projections from the surface of this layer, which are called dermal papillae, that stick out into the epidermis above. These contain lots of tactile cells, as described previously. In areas where there is lots of friction, like the hands, these papillae sit on mounds called dermal ridges, which cause ridges in the epidermis as well, which are meant to enhance the gripping ability of the fingers, and they are visible as the lines on our fingertips that make our unique fingerprints. Below this papillary layer sits the reticular layer, which is most of the dermis, and it is made of dense, fibrous connective tissue that is arranged irregularly. A network of blood vessels sits below this, just before the hypodermis. What else can we say about the skin? We mentioned that the Stratum Basale also contains melanocytes, which produce melanin. This is a pigment molecule, and this is one of the components of the skin that determines its color and protects the skin from ultraviolet radiation. The other pigments responsible for skin color are keratin, which is yellow-orange, and hemoglobin, which is red when oxygenated. We will discuss this molecule in more depth later in the series. That wraps things up for the skin, so let's just briefly touch on the other components of the integumentary system, which are called skin appendages. First, there is hair. Of course, most of us have lots of hair on our heads, but there is also hair all over the body, including eyelashes and nose hairs, and these all have specific protective functions. So what is a hair made of exactly? As it turns out, a hair is a flexible strand made largely of dead keratinized cells. This is hard keratin, which is a bit different from the soft keratin found in cells of the epidermis, which makes them more durable and not as flaky. Hairs are produced by hair follicles. These possess a root, which is the part deep inside the follicle where keratinization is happening, and a shaft, the part closer to the surface of the skin, and then extending outside the body where keratinization is complete. The hair itself consists of 3 layers of cells. The innermost is the medulla, containing large cells and soft keratin. Next is the cortex, which is several layers of flattened cells. And lastly, there is the cuticle, which is a single layer of overlapping cells, the most keratinized cells in the hair. As for the follicle the hair sits in, this also has some structure to it. In general, a hair follicle is a pocket that folds down from the surface of the epidermis down into the dermis, about 4 millimeters below the surface. The deep end then expands slightly to form a hair bulb. A bundle of nerve endings attach to the bulb and act as a receptor, responding to any bending of the hair and alerting the brain in case an insect is there or something of the like. A little bit of dermal tissue called a hair papilla protrudes into the bulb, which supplies signals and nutrients to the hair so it can grow. The wall of each follicle has a few layers. The outermost is the peripheral connective tissue sheath, derived from the dermis. Next is the glassy membrane, derived from the basal lamina. And then there is the innermost epithelial root sheath, derived from the epidermis. This last section has an external part and an internal part, which thins as it approaches the bulb. The cells that actively divide are found in the hair matrix, which push existing cells upwards as they divide, causing the hair to grow. In addition, each follicle has an erector pili. This is a small bundle of muscle cells that can contract and pull the follicle in such a way that the surface of the skin dimples out, producing what we refer to as goosebumps when cold or afraid. Our body hair is pretty sparse, so this no longer serves much purpose, but for much furrier mammals, it is an important defense mechanism for trapping heat and intimidating enemies. Hair can either be vellus hair, which is pale and fine, or terminal hair, which is darker and more coarse, like hair of the eyebrows and scalp. The nails found on our fingers and toes are also part of the integumentary system. These are products of a modification of the epidermis. Just like with hair, in contrast to the soft keratin of the skin, nails contain hard keratin, making them great tools for scratching or picking up objects. Each nail has a free edge, which is the very tip, then a body, which is most of what we see, and then a proximal root, which is embedded in the skin. The part of the epidermis the nail sits on is called the nail bed, and the nail grows out of the nail matrix, which pushes the nail outwards across the nail bed as these cells divide. There are also skin folds overlapping the borders of the nail, which are called nail folds, sitting on the lateral and proximal borders, and the latter extends onto the nail as the eponychium. At the edge of the finger is the hyponychium, where dirt tends to collect. The last part of the integumentary system we must mention is the vast collection of glands that can be found. First up are the sweat glands, also known as sudoriferous glands. These are found almost everywhere on the surface of the skin, totaling up to around 3 million. There are two types of sweat glands. The first is called apocrine or merocrine sweat glands. Most of them are of this type, and it consists of a coiled tube. Secretion occurs in the dermis, and the resulting fluid, or sweat, travels through the tube towards a funnel-shaped opening called a pore. Sweat is 99% water, but it contains some salts and metabolic wastes, among other things. Sweat is also secreted by apocrine sweat glands, which are far fewer, found only in certain areas, and secrete fat and protein components along with the normal mixture, which is the cause of body odor. Ceruminous glands and mammary glands are also types of apocrine glands, which produce earwax and breast milk. Beyond sweat glands, there are sebaceous glands, also known as oil glands. These are branched alveolar glands that secrete sebum, which is made of oily lipids. This will soften and lubricate hair and skin, slowing water loss and killing certain bacteria. So that covers the basics of the integumentary system, which consists of skin, hair, nails, and glands. This system acts as a barrier, separating what's outside of us from what's inside of us. It has the ability to repair quickly, regulate body temperature, and respond to stimuli outside of the body, among other things. Now that we have this system covered, let's head inside the body and check out the rest. Thanks for watching, guys.